spending nothing, just about. We're doing some interesting stuff. Well, it's not us actually. We were talking to some NGOs in Colombia who are taking farmers to see the future. They're taking them from one ecological zone and taking them to another ecological zone and saying all the predictions are your farm's going to look like this in 10 years' time. You better start thinking about it now. Very nice. Seeing is believing how it works. But we're trying all sorts of things because climate change is coming upon us in many, many countries very, very fast. Now, that's a very sort of quick bit on the sort of the big shocks that have hit us. And what's that done to the way we think about development? We being a vaguely defined set of chattering people who talk about, study, write about development, NGOs, governments, academics. I'll leave it as fuzzy as that for the moment. And I could go on for days, and I'll do on the day. But here's 4 things I think are worth thinking about. We're thinking differently about poverty. We're thinking a lot more about inequality. We're trying to think about complexity. And we're going to think about power and theories of change. So let's talk about poverty first. What is poverty? We're still, in many cases, talking about poverty as do you earn more or less than $1.25 a day. And you can only really talk about poverty like that if you haven't talked to a poor person. The best exercise in talking and listening to poor people was from the World Bank in the 1990s, 20 years ago. Voices of the Poor, fantastic piece of work. They talked to 60,000 poor people in 50 countries and said, basically, what's it like? What's it like being poor? And the picture that emerges from that is poverty is a state of being, of ill-being, at that. Poverty is a sense of anxiety, shame, humiliation. That thing about not being able to have makeup, not being able to look good, not being able to afford the essential rituals which your community demands. And worry. Worry about what if something happens? What if the rickshaw driver gets injured? What if the daughter gets sick and you have to spend a fortune on hospital fees? What if the cow dies? What if the policeman comes and demands a massive bribe and you have to pay sell all your assets to keep them away from you? And the lack of resources, so that when you get those shots, you sell off your assets, you go into this downward spiral and it takes you years to recover. That's what poverty is about. More recently, some interesting work on income poverty, the chronic poverty report, saying, okay, we've got this figure that we always bandy about. 1.4 billion people live in poverty at any one time. That's 1 in 5 of the world's population live below $1.25 a day. Probably about a third of what this costs. I don't know, something like that. But that's at any one time. Over the course of a year, 1 billion of that 1.4 billion will go in and out of poverty. They churn. There's the hunger season before harvest, good months, bad months, all sorts of reasons why people go in and out. But there's 400 million who are permanently below the poverty line. And they're different people. They're the disabled, the elderly, the very, very remote, miles from, hours from the nearest road. All of the above. Very discriminated, indigenous ethnic groups or castes, or a mixture. And so when people talk about we can end poverty, we can eradicate poverty, and I'm sure I will do so at some point tonight, it's not about getting the people that just around $1.25 a day out of poverty, it's getting that deep chronic poor out of poverty. And the solutions are different. If you think of a disabled, elderly, indigenous woman a day from the nearest road, you're not going to get her out of poverty with microfinance. We're giving her a sewing machine. You need to think about some other ways to help people when you get down to this hardcore poverty. So I think there's quite big policy implications. The third bit, briefly, is if you take the voices of the poor seriously, then what we should be measuring is people's sense of well-being. Do they feel satisfied with their lives? Do they think their lives are getting better? And interestingly, the organisations that are really making progress on this are not the aid agencies, but the national governments. North and South, a lot of governments have got that the normal statistical metrics are not measuring what matters to people, and they're trying to find ways to get inside people's heads. The other interesting organisation that's doing this is the pollsters. Gallup has this amazing poll of 147 countries, which it does every year, which are like they take the emotional temperature of the world. They ask a statistically significant number of people, did you feel any of these emotions yesterday? And they build up a picture. And then you can see rage building in Southern Europe. or in North Africa before the Arab Spring. You know, it's quite scary, actually, the implications of what they might get to. I asked two of them, could you have predicted the Arab Spring? And they both look about 15 years old and have these impeccable suits. They looked at me and said, not yet. And I just thought, wow, well, when they can predict the Arab Spring, you know who their clients are going to be. You know, it's going to be the governments. And that kind of worries me, but they're working on it. So what are the implications for aid agencies? Change in metrics. Think about chronic poverty. And one of the implications of all these shocks that are coming over us is that we're thinking more and more about how to smooth volatility. Lots of the things which have become more important, more fashionable, more faddish in development come under this general heading of smoothing mechanisms, social protection, cash transfers, cash for work, all those different ways to help people through the hard times, the ups and downs. But food reserves, climate change adaptation, all these things are smoothing mechanisms, and that's going to become more and more common if volatility continues to worsen. The other thing it's given us is a new fuzzword. Fuzzwords in development are words which are buzzwords, but are quite imprecise. And I think they're correct. I like buzzwords. Academics hate buzzwords. But resilience is a new buzzword. And everybody's talking about resilience. Resilience is roughly bending, not breaking when a shock hits, and then flipping back to something a bit better than you were. That's my definition. Everybody will have a different definition. It doesn't matter. Everybody can roughly know what resilience is, and you can have useful discussions about how to strengthen it until some academic comes in and says, precise definitions, and then the meeting breaks up in disarray. So I think buzzwords are really important. They get people talking, and resilience is one of the new ones. The other thing that I think has really come out of our work on food prices, but was around anyway, for decades, feminist economists have been saying, why are you only looking at half the world? You're looking at the public priced world, not the private, unpaid world of care economy. And when you look at the food price spike and the impact it's had, if women go out to work, dump the kids, assuming men aren't going to do anything, they dump the kids on their parents, then grandparent care becomes bigger. What are the policy implications? Can the grandparents actually cope with that? What else are the grandparents supposed to be doing? This would be growing food, who knows? That kind of big shift within the care economy which is taking place because of food prices is completely invisible. It's invisible in terms of what we measure, and therefore it's invisible in terms of policy measures. So we really do have to go back and start not just saying we need to think about the care economy, but actually working out what we do differently because of that. Second big implication is inequality. If you haven't seen this photo already, you will. Okay? This is becoming the vogue inequality photo. It's from Sao Paulo in Brazil. It's not a Photoshop. And it's kind of, yeah, Brazil has been the poster child of inequality for decades. But the interesting thing is Brazil is actually the country that is doing most about inequality right now. The rate of fall of inequality in Brazil is comparable only to the New Deal in the US. There's a quite extraordinary transformation. End of hunger, end of absolute poverty, and they keep it going. And yeah, I think it's and I'll talk a bit about that now. But the reason why inequality has suddenly become much more legitimate as a topic, and when I came to the US in 2008 with my PowerPoint about inequality and redistribution, I lasted about 2 lectures before I deleted redistribution and put rebalancing. Because I was getting so much crap from everybody about talking about redistribution. I was feeling the day of the socialist, that people just stopped listening to anything I was saying. Yeah? So then it was very hard to talk about inequality and redistribution. It's much easier now. The IMF is publishing papers saying that the levels of inequality are dysfunctional. They're actually economically harmful. And one of the reasons for that is what's happened to the global distribution of income. NGOs do things called killer facts. Killer facts are things which are based, sometimes loosely, in reality, and they summarize a symbolic truth which stays in people's heads. They summarize a problem. And we did a killer fact recently where we worked out that the richest 100 individuals in the world, I guess roughly the number of people in this room, earned enough in 2012 to end world poverty 4 times for 1.4 billion people. And these are numbers from Bloomberg and the Brookings Institution. Yeah, we didn't make this stuff up. That level of extreme inequality is deeply shocking. Just a 25% tax on 100 people, and if you get lots of ifs and buts and things, How would you get money to poor people? All that, fine. But in terms of the volume of money, that could end your poverty. It's quite a shocking thought. If you want a more sort of rigorous academic approach to this, I recommend Branko and Milanovic at the World Bank. Branko has been working on inequality for decades. He did a great analysis of inequality in Jane Austen. And he takes really wacky attitudes, sort of angles of entry to thinking about inequality. He worked out the wage differentials in Jane Austen. This is what World Bank can do for China. And he's now on Twitter, and he's stopped using words entirely. He just tweets graphs. And this is one of his latest graphs. It's a cracker. So he's looked at where did the dollars go from 1988 to 2008, 20 years before the crisis. This isn't a percentage thing, it's absolute where did the actual dollars go. And this is the global distribution of income. These are centiles, 1 centimetre samples of the global distribution, rich people at the top, poor people at the bottom. And then the bottom of the heap, very few dollars went. A few dollars went here. And this is all that stuff you read in the papers about the emerging markets. This is the rise of China. This is the rise of India, Indonesia, the emerging powers, Brazil. And actually, in terms of dollars, it's quite low. If you had it in percentages, it would be up here somewhere because, a few dollars on top of a few dollars is a big percentage. But once you look at the dollars, it's quite low. There's a fall. That's the hollowing out of North America and Europe. That's the skilled labour and the unskilled labour actually having real wages which are stagnant or falling. And then you have a huge spike. The top 2% got 56%, over half of the extra dollars over that 20-year period. So this is occupied globally. This is it's not 1%, it's 2%, but it's pretty close. So that's what's getting people riled at global level. But if you think about it at national level, the NGOs are a bit out of date. The NGO's traditional spiel on inequality is inequality is getting worse in all countries, between and within countries. And that's not actually true. If you look at the G20, which are the sort of 20 most powerful countries, the old G8, the old rich industrialized countries, and the new emerging countries, everything to the left of the line is inequality getting worse. Everything to the right of the line is inequality getting better. 16 of the G20 countries do conform to that old model. 16 of the 20 countries are getting more unequal. If you're going to be in Russia, make sure you're rich. We knew that anyway, but it's definitely true. All these countries are getting more unequal. But up here, 4 countries, all of them developing, 3 of them Latin American, getting more equal. Okay, so that's interesting, and especially that case of Brazil I told you. There's lots to learn there. I was told that the guy who's taken over as head of research at Oxfam GB, who's a very modest person, apparently got New York to adopt some of Mexico's policies on cash transfers, and because it's had such a good impact in Mexico, and it's having a recent impact in New York now. So I think it's time we did a paper saying what can rich countries learn from the poor ones in terms of reducing inequality. If you get outside the G20 and look at low-income countries, it's even more true. All those countries have falling inequality. So I think there's something going on out there. We don't know why this is. It may be because the rich people are all leaving, coming to America or something. We need to do some work on it. But certainly there's an interesting story now. There's stuff to learn from about how you reduce inequality, and many of these economies actually have high growth as well. So if you have a high growth, high redistribution economic model, you should be out there studying it much more than we are. And we should probably use a different index. This is at the wrong end of this story. So bear with me. If you stay conscious, I'll get back to something less wonky afterwards.